Peter Boghossian,
John,
welcome back to Dad Saves
thanks for having
America.
me. Appreciate it.
So, for those tuning in, we don't usually have wine at the table, but we brought this over from a dinner over in our lunchroom here at the office in the Dad Saves America studios.
Chianti.
A dry Chianti per your request. I'm excited to have you back. The last time we spoke was in the spring
Right.
of 2024. A lot has happened since then.
Correct.
And so there's so much for us to talk about. You are a philosopher. You understand the nature of thought. That is your area of expertise. And I have a lot of thoughts I want to probe you on.
Please.
Let's start.
As long as you keep the thoughts not physically.
Yes, no physical probing this
to
time.
go.
Oh God Almighty, we're already off the rails. Okay, so what has changed for real in America in the aftermath of the past 8 months? Let's say, when that bullet grazed Trump, I'd say that's the start of what felt like a real change. That happened, and then immediately several very big people in the Twitterverse and in public intellectual spaces, business spaces, suddenly said, "I'm prepared to vote for this guy." I don't care about I do care about politics, but the politics isn't what's interesting. What's interesting is that seemed to demark a change in the willingness for people to say something that should be allowed and permissible, which is, I am in favor of one of the two presidential candidates in America.
Pretty American.
That shouldn't be not allowed.
Yeah.
So what's changed from your perspective for real?
I think that people are more afraid. Okay. I think that people are less afraid now to speak about things than they were we'll call it pre-bullet. I think people are less reticent to call things out. So they have less of a problem of calling things out, whatever silliness it happens to be. Oh, the trans thing has changed, the quote unquote transing kids, the women in sports. So the cultural issues, the trans women, in other words, men in sports, the cultural issues have changed. But I also think that's what's super interesting. I read a study with a series of polls that said that one of the number one indicators of whether or not someone would vote Democrat is whether they trust the legacy media.
Oh, I saw this one.
Yeah. And I just thought that was so interesting. I think it's I don't know if the bullet was causal to this, but I think it's the understanding that legacy media is wholesale ideologically captured. But I don't think it's traced specifically to the bullet. But I do think that that's a realization that people have now that's ahistorical. They've never had that before.
I am a big fan of Martin Gurry's book, the Revolt of the Public, and this speaks to that. In that, his basic thesis is we are about 25 years in a sense into a fundamental technology change. The internet, the fifth wave of information, as he puts it. If you want to say, hieroglyphs were the first, and then the printing press was the second, which was a big one. Like the printing press gives rise to Protestantism, and then the 30 Years' War in Europe. Like it's this change in technology that then leads to a change in communication and culture and society and politics and everything. Like the printing press, radical. Radio, radical. One directional broadcast, really awesome for dictatorship. Television, and then the internet, and now the internet is working its way fully through reordering our society. Do you think that that's part of what this is, that we're in like a new phase of that?
Boy, I don't know. Situating it like that, it's just making me think. Nick Bostrom, the AI guy, says that artificial general intelligence will be the last invention we'll ever invent. I think that's a fascinating concept. I don't know. I mean, I think that we're on the precipice of something extraordinary. I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned about, if you look at Haidt's work, he talks about young women in particular and it's not hours on the phone, it's what you do on your phone. Social media in particular is a toxin. TikTok is even worse. TikTok, we've associated the TikTok contagion with the trans contagion.
Yeah, they seem to be very closely linked.
Yeah.
The rise of self-identification with the rise of being on social platforms.
Yeah, so I don't think our brains evolved to handle that. I don't know. I'm concerned. I'm deeply concerned about how we're going to deal with the next few years. I have a buddy of mine who's a philosopher. He just retired, and he says, "So, well, what are you doing with yourself?" He said, "Like, I just basically spend all my time on Grok 3." And basically all he does is he's just like having a team of research assistants immediately.
Yeah.
So not even artificial general intelligence. So I don't know. I think we're in a shifting world. I think you'll see the death of the this kind of veers from the questions a bit, but I think you'll see the death of the laptop class in 2 years. I think you see the rise of AI agents in this 2025. But don't listen to me, man. I bought Tesla at 426, and it's like, it's taken a massive dive. So maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about.
All right, here's your obligatory reminder to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell. It really actually does help us out a lot. When we're trying to book awesome new guests, they look at how many subscribers are on the channel and they say, yep, this is worth doing. And I want to bring the best possible people to you that I can. Speaking of which, let's get back to the conversation. Well, the culture factor is we're just at the early stages of it in so many ways. Like we went through this, what I think can reasonably be called a woke reign of terror.
Yeah.
And
it's still ongoing.
It's still ongoing, but it has broken enough that if you look at other periods of sort of cultural terror, like Maoism, we never got to the level of mass murder of the typical communist.
Yeah.
But the level of self-censorship, I saw polls showing that 80% of college students said they weren't comfortable airing their views.
Yeah.
Or speaking up.
And then 50% say that violence against a speaker is okay, depending on the campus.
Yeah. So this is a woke reign of terror, very Maoist in its nature.
Yeah.
And now large numbers of people of all strata of society, like super elite types like Bill Ackman and Mark Andreessen and obviously Elon and Jeff Bezos, who just came out saying the Washington Post editorial board is now being replaced and will basically be
better late than never. But
will basically be Reason magazine. It'll be like Free Minds and Free Markets is the new WAPO.
That's a good way to put it. Yeah, Reason magazine.
I like that.
Yeah.
I don't know who still reads this newspaper. Like old
Legacy
people.
media is dead. That's the thing. They didn't even see it coming. It's like in the 90s. So that's the other thing. Mike Nana calls it information Protestantism, as opposed to one single source of information Catholicism. In the late 90s, we had, because I'm 58, we had ABC, CBS, NBC. You remember that. Mm-hmm. Then you had the record labels, and then Sean Fanning with Napster came and destroyed that.
Yeah.
And so it's pretty obvious that we're in a sea change now legacy media is pretty much dead. I just had dinner with Schellenberger last night, and he said to me, like, who are the three most powerful people? They're Trump, Elon, and Rogan. They're the three most, the three people who have the most influence. Like Schellenberger will put out a tweet, it'll get far more views than anyone in legacy media, far more views than anything in CNN or what have you.
Yeah, this was called sort of the podcast election.
Yeah.
And
Harris could not. So that's the other thing. I wonder if in the future, to become president, you're going to have to sit down with Rogan for 3 hours. I mean, I knew there was no possible way she could sit down with Rogan. You're telling me she's going to have a 3-hour conversation with someone like an intelligent person? Like, there's no possible way it's literally impossible. She's a moron.
So
she's she's a total moron.
Yeah. She was not someone capable. She didn't have original thoughts. And it was not clear that she is capable of original thoughts.
Well, that's really one of the most charitable things you can say about her. But okay, she's the worst possible candidate she could have run.
No, it's
joy. She was giving you a joy. Imagine that. We have a fentanyl epidemic. We have homelessness. We have massive budgetary deficits. We have a war in Ukraine. We have China threatening Taiwan. We have loose nukes. She's giving you joy.
Well, she was giving us joy until she was warning us about fascism, because that was the closing argument.
And so that's the other thing. That's the other thing that's insane. Like, if you actually believe. These people spent years calling Trump Hitler. And to be clear, I'm no Trump fan. They spent years calling Trump Hitler, but yet Oprah Winfrey charges $1 million to speak against Hitler. Where are the marches in the streets? If you actually believe someone was Hitler, well, yeah, you probably would shoot him. Or you would at the very least protest by the millions in the streets. I didn't see almost any protests. I saw a bunch of like fringe Antifa lunatic groups destroying statues. I think they were lying. That's not how people act if they think someone is Hitler.
That's right.
Yeah.
So is that part of, to stay on track with it from a culture perspective, from a free thought perspective, is that the other piece of the puzzle, was the realization that was all lies? Correct. You look at there was like a moment, I think, was it at the inauguration, where you have all these people together, and no one's pulling out a knife and stabbing Trump because he's Hitler.
Yeah.
They're laughing with each other.
Yeah.
So that was all bullshit. So therefore, now I'm not going to pretend to abide by the pieties of the woke reign of terror, because it was obviously all lies.
Yeah.
Shame on me for thinking I had to in the first place. How do you think?
No, not the latter. The latter. So that was an important thing. The latter would be, and remember this, mark my words, I've been saying this for years. I never believed any of it. That's what they're going to say. It's so ghoulish. It's so stupid. It's so idiotic. That's what they have to say. I never believed any of it anyway. I never believed any of this stuff. I never believed that we should cut off the breasts of 15-year-olds. I never believed it. 12-year-olds. If you're in the womb, you can't, so that's one thing. I don't think that the distrust of the media was causally related to the shot, to Trump's attempted assassination.
No, that has been brewing for a long time.
It's been brewing.
I mean, actually,
and they brought it on themselves.
It's funny. Gen Z, Jean Twenge's probably been the best sociologist to study Gen Z, I think, and her books have pointed to that Gen Z has the lowest opinion of the media of anything in the hierarchy of things that they should care about. Like they do not trust the traditional media at all.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a very, very, very close friend of mine who's the VP at, maybe I shouldn't say the network, but I'll say that, at A&E. And she was telling me, I've had a few drinks, doesn't matter. She was telling me that the problem with reality TV is that everyone thinks it's fake, when in fact it's far more real than people think that it is. And I just thought that was so interesting.
That is interesting. Well, it's
the same thing. It's, it's isomorphic to the fake news and fake news media and the narratives that are constantly being pushed out.
There's a nose. I wonder if one of the things that's happened is because I think also below 30-year-olds, like I think a majority of men below 30 voted for Trump. Like the shift at least among men of young people, it's like if he's the new Reagan in our warped 21st century, then we have like a new generation of Alex P. Keatons. And I wonder how much of that is the fact that it's a generation that is actually kind of media savvy. And so they can look at someone like Gavin Newsom and be like, you are the most inauthentic robot, sandblasted person. I don't trust a word coming out of your mouth. And I saw your tongue split at one point, so I know I can't.
Yeah.
But
it's interesting. For years I had Chinese exchange students live in my house, maybe for well over a decade. And they had several commonalities. One commonality, unrelated to our conversation, is I never met a single Chinese person who liked guacamole. And all the people, we had dozens and dozens of Chinese exchange students.
This reminds me of when I waited tables at Trump Castle, by the way.
Really?
During college. I picked up several patterns, one of which was Japanese tourists always ordered orange juice, even with lobster dinner.
Really?
Don't know why. But anyway, continue.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. I didn't know that. But the other thing is, not a single person who lived in my home for, again, well over a decade from China ever watched the news, ever had any interest. It never kind of, or I would speak to them about issues or affairs, nothing. And when you really drill down on this, they just have a fundamental distrust. And
that makes sense.
Perhaps because of the system in which they lived.
But that's, I think, what's happening now
with younger people. They just have a fundamental distrust. And so that's why they're going to podcasts like this. That's why they're going to alternative media.
I did this documentary At the Fork with Lisa about like the way animals are raised for food. You'd like it as a paleo guy. And we went to the Berlin Film Festival, and I met a journalist. I can't remember where she worked, but she was from Beijing. And so I asked her, this was like 2016, so this was a while ago. And I asked her, I said, so what's it like to be a journalist in China? Is it like, I mean, we're here in Western Europe. So at the time I was like, we're freer. That's not true anymore. If you're now, maybe maybe you might be freer in Beijing than in Berlin.
In among certain things. Yeah. With like,
but one of the things she said was, well, there's just some things you don't talk about. Otherwise, you're fine. Like, and I think it might have been all kinds of stuff. It was like, you don't criticize the government. Like, there was an article in Vogue and that criticized the government. So Vogue was shut down for a month.
Yeah.
So you just don't do that. And then you're fine.
Yeah. So you're not a journalist.
Yeah. You're
mouthpiece of you're pushing forward whatever's morally fashionable from the dominant orthodoxy. That's what you're doing, which is fine. Just say that's what I am.
I think in a world where life is getting materially better for people living in desperate poverty, you can set that aside and say, I don't have to worry about that because I am literally living 3 times better than my parents lived.
So they bartered democracy, voting, etc., for economic prosperity.
It's interesting about this. I think the theory was among people like my beloved Milton Friedman, where freedom and free market, where economic freedom goes, democratic institutions, or at least democratic norms, whatever you want, all these stupid words, but voting will follow. And that turned out to be false. So it turned out that actually some measure of economic liberty, like private property, ability to start a business and keep some measure of your profits, is super magical, and it lifts hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. And that is so powerful that even in the absence of being able to say, vote out your dictator, you're living so much better. You're like, fine, I don't need to worry about that for now.
Okay. So now I have a question for you. I think this is the essence of the postmodern condition. By what basis do you say that it's wrong to barter liberty for economic prosperity?
Well, I only meant it's wrong in the sense that I don't think that was some choice that was presented. Like,
because it was from on high.
Because basically, as I understand what happened in China, is you had Mao dies. I know that there's people who think he's great in academia, but he was a mass murdering psychopath. So he dies, and this formerly robust civilization has some green shoots that start to pop back up. And what they draw on, I think, is it Deng Xiaoping? I forget exactly, but they draw on essentially the model of Hong Kong, which at that point was the freest economy in the world. And that gives rise to what's known as the special economic zone. So Shenzhen and these other places, they essentially adopt free market, relatively free markets. Oh, you can have contracts. You can keep what you earn. You can start something and keep it. You can keep your promises that you write down, and some local Communist Party governor won't just steal it all. And that works like magic because people want to. Nobody washes rental cars for a reason, right? Like, if I'm going to keep what I have, I'm going to invest in it. I'm going to put in the effort. And if you're going to take it from me, and I know you're going to take it, well, why should I improve anything? And I don't. That's the tragedy of the commons. So there wasn't some opportunity for political liberalization presented or enabled. There was no French Revolution style overthrow of the dictatorship. It was just a certain level of a kind of enlightened liberalism. Liberalization economically that took place. That's my understanding of the history. And then Xi Jinping in the past 10 years has started to really like tighten the grips, consolidate power, start to look much more like your classic guy with a thick mustache, but still not as bad as Stalin. Like, it's still like they're still growing, they're still getting more prosperous. But that's the sense in which I don't think there wasn't a like revolutionary trade-off where you got democracy and freer markets. There was just like, oh no, we're still a dictatorship, but
yeah, in fact, almost the opposite, because who's that big buffed guy who issued the apology? He was in a great show. I can't remember the name of this guy.
Michael Cena is it?
He was in a funny show.
I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, so like he apologized in Chinese and all those people. So it was that the desire to have the Chinese market open to Americans changed Americans' behavior. It wasn't that the Chinese bended their values to make them more accessible to what I've been, a big theme in my life has been error correction or free markets. I think free markets less so, but a kind of glasnost and perestroika. They don't have it. I think you're going to see a radical realignment too in the world, but I could be wrong about that.
So you have this cultural Maoism starting to wane
in this country,
in America in particular. It's not, and it seems like we exported the woke reign of terror, and now we're like, oh, maybe over the hump, or I hope.
Yeah, remember that it's about 1.5 to 2 years. Everyone is behind us about 1.5 to 2 years.
Like the rest of the English speaking in Western world.
Yeah, I'm thinking Oceania and the Anglosphere, anywhere in the English speaking world, because this is a neo-colonial export. This is our export to them. So instead of exporting Miranda rights, freedom of speech, freedom of the press, we have exported a derangement syndrome.
Yes, we've exported anti-colonial,
right. And that's why
terror.
That's why we have to destroy the system. That's why we need a guy like Trump. If we lived in a rational, sane world, we would need a Department of Education. We would need to say, well, we need phonics. We would need our institutions to do our thinking for us in a very real sense. But they've been hijacked, because we have cognitive biases. We have problems. Have you seen what Rufo did with the exposing the completely crazy secret chats from the NSA? And
this is hot off the presses. I haven't seen this yet.
Yeah.
I know a bunch of people got fired this week for doing crazy nonsense.
Like, you want to do crazy nonsense? That's no problem. You do it in your own time. You can just have sex with a blender. It'd be ill-advised, but you could. But the chats that these people had were, they were, I'm very sexually liberal, and these things were just, things were
on the government chat system.
Yeah. Well, no, even worse, on the government's dime. Well, I'm paying for them. You're paying for them. And these people are like talking about, there's a family show, Dad Saves America.
Yeah,
trust me, you don't want
family-ish.
Yeah, but
you've been warned, families.
But I do think that
Peter
that's why
is
you
not
need
family-friendly.
That's why you need a Trump. We need to burn the system down because the people who are in these positions have betrayed the public trust. I would personally, again, this is just me, but I would imprison all of them after a fair trial.
Okay, let's actually talk about this for a little bit. This is actually something that's really interesting and difficult.
Yeah.
So you are someone who came. You're not like a classical conservative. You're not like some
I don't
Edmund Burke guy.
I don't consider myself a conservative at all.
Right, and yet,
I know everybody calls me like a Nazi, alt-right. Like, I'm just somebody who looks at evidence and makes reasonable inferences based upon the evidence I have to public policies. Like, I honestly do not consider myself a conservative, but I'm just inured. I'm immune at this point to people saying, oh, Boghossian's a conservative. It's just not true.
But I bring that
if you can self-identify as a woman, why can't I self-identify? That's the whole crazy thing about it. Like, yeah.
Yeah, I can self-identify. Politics is certainly more immutable than the size of your gametes.
Yeah.
So there's some threads that are happening here.
Yeah.
One of them is that, so the Saves America part. Why? Why do I want to save America? Why do I think it needs saving?
Yeah, why do you want to save America?
I think that there's, first of all, I live here and I have a son and I have a wife and I want a future that's good. I do think fundamentally that America, for all its problems, and I should say specifically the United States of America, was really the peak of the Enlightenment.
Agreed.
Made manifest as government, as governance, as a place, as a set of rules, as a set of understandings that were shared.
Let me summarize for you, and you tell me if you agree. We should be, and we were, the shining city upon a hill.
100%. I completely agree with that. I think one of the things that's been happening for me personally is the only ism, aside from Catholicism, which I want to come back to later in our conversation, so you can beat up on my
or you could beat up on my atheism. So
yeah, we can spar on religion, which is important for us to talk about together. But I don't think I'm a conservative. I don't think I'm a liberal. I don't think I'm a classical liberal anymore. I think the closest I have in my political worldview is I'm an Americanist. I like and why do I say that?
Yeah, what is that, first of all?
To me, it's a vision for a kind of living in a political environment, because we can't escape politics. It's the rules of the road for the place you live. That says this: government exists to protect your right to be a free person, first and foremost, and really singularly. Number one. Number two, that kind of vision of limited government. The Bill of Rights is all Congress shall pass no law X. Or like my favorites are like the 9th and 10th Amendments, which are basically like anything we haven't listed, just in case you weren't clear. If we didn't list it, it goes back to the states or to the people, just to be sure, just in case you thought maybe that we left something out and therefore we can do it. You can't. That kind of limited government, even when it's written down on paper, must be for and by and preserved by essentially something like a moral people, a people who believe that in their heart. Like the economist James Buchanan talks about this as the Constitution. Correct. In us. It's not on paper.
Yeah.
It's in us. And so that sentiment, all men are created equal, and therefore we need to have a limited government that sets these equal men and women up to thrive. That's Americanism, and I'm that. All of that. And I think that's worth fighting for. And so now we're at this moment, and I know I'm monologuing for those of you that wish I would shut up.
No,
so I'm sorry.
No, I'm processing.
But I think what is interesting to me is I like where we are so far with the Trump administration. I'm not hesitant about that.
Yeah, I'm actually shocked by how much I like it. But
well, and I want to hear that. But also when we get to a zone that's like burn the system down, yep. the system, smash it all to pieces, I would like a strip it down to the studs, but keep the studs. I want a sledgehammer, not a wrecking ball, but I want a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
It's still it's gonna be a lot of dust. We're gonna bust through the plaster. We're gonna rip it all out, and there's those beautiful studs. And then we're gonna start to, dare I say, build back better. But but that's what I want. I don't know if we can have that. I don't know if that's a path that like is possible. But when it's just like when you said smash it all down,
burn it all down,
that's a different revolution that was tried in France, and it sucked. That's the Jacobins. That's the off with all their heads. That's the yay revolution. Oops, Napoleon back to dictatorship, like that. And I think that we're gonna fly close to that sun, maybe. That French Revolution sun. If we're and I don't know how close we should fly to it. We can't be that far. We need to be closer to that than we were. So
I'm going to tell you, and really be sincere. I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you my reflections on what you just said, and
Please.
If they're not direct enough, tell me. No, but really, because I'm trying to, I try to increasingly as I get older, I try to use these conversations. I try to think in real time. So I'm not like memorizing any script here. I'm just trying to think out loud. I think it just makes it more interesting too.
You're like Jordan Peterson giving a speech.
Yeah, well, that's where I got that
I'm gonna
from.
close my eyes.
Doing that. I've been doing that for 5 years. He said people don't want to go to see what you've already worked out. They want to see you work out things in real time. So when you talked about what an Americanism is, like for me, what an American is there's something about cognitive liberty that's so important to me. Like we need to allow people to believe, to be free in their thoughts and their spirit. We need to allow people to lead any kind of lives they want to lead. And that includes things that we might really disagree upon. Now, there are caveats in that, provided it's with a consenting adult and provided they're over 18. I mean, there are some I think those are the only two basics I can, or maybe they have to have basic cognitive wherewithal. They can't be suffering from some like extreme cognitive malady.
Full adult agency.
Yeah. So I think we need that. And I think my concern increasingly, well, the left is a complete disgrace, right? They tell you exactly what to think, and they capture the academic institutions.
They offer no value.
Yeah, they're worse than worthless. They're actually a harm to the way I view America, and I think the way you view America. My concern is
it wasn't always that way.
No, it's in fact quite the opposite. I saw a wonderful photo. It was like Trump, wonderful tweet, Trump, Musk, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, and the caption was, "The Democrats won the election." Because the other people went to crazy town. But I think that, to me, cognitive liberty is vital, like freedom of association, freedom of press, basic freedoms. And I'm now worried on the Republican side of the slide to Christian nationalism. I'm worried that they're constructing echo chambers in which they use the tactics of many of the left, the kind of cancellation, the viciousness. I mean, I won't make any secret of it. I just had an event canceled of mine, two events now, paid events, because they're upset with my writing partner, James Lindsay. And so they just canceled the event. So they're using the same tactics instead of saying, okay, well, let's we're going to change,
because he's been a critic of the woke right.
Yeah. So is, what I would have done and say, okay, we don't like this. I'm getting a lot of heat, but you know what? We're going to have you debate.
Yeah.
We don't like the fact that you're hanging out with this guy, or you published a book with him, or our collaboration has been hyper prolific. We're going to have you debate to justify it. I'm like, okay, no problem. I'll debate anything. Like, my rule for debating, just by the way, is as long as you haven't harassed me, I will debate you. I just debated all the UHCX kids today for like literally 2 hours. About God, you'd like that. But so that was the first thing you said. And the second thing you said is, I think that there's something, and this is one of the lessons I've learned in the last year, and I've been thinking a lot about. When you talked about the construction of societies, you didn't use those words, but when you talked about America, when you talked about, as I reflect on the conversation, I think one of the most important principles upon which we can build an entire society are the means of error correction preserved? Is it possible to make a critique?
Yeah.
Political correctness, blasphemy laws, particularly in Islamic countries, the means of error correction have been disabled.
Oh, right.
Yeah. So
that's actually that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah. So this, like, you could construct a whole civilization based upon this. So can I go down a tiny rabbit hole?
Might be reductionist, but go for it.
I don't think so. Can I go to, okay. So a tiny rabbit hole. So, and I credit David Deutsch, Brett Hall for all this. So these are not my thoughts. So there are two reasons ideas spread. And I'm saying this in the context of like Americanism, what it is to be America, and the kind of America that I think you and I value, although we have a different metaphysical beliefs or what have you. I think fundamentally, even morally, we have.
Yeah.
Okay. So the ideas spread from sticky memes. It's a kind of a takeoff from Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. An idea will spread mimetically from one of two reasons. These are sticky. If the means of error correction are disabled, that is, you can't criticize the idea, that's a bad sticky meme and that will spread.
Wokeism.
Wokeism, Islamism, you can't criticize it. You can't levy any kind of criticism or something horrible will happen. We need to move away from that as Americans and as a society. We need to move toward good sticky memes. Good sticky memes are the reason that the ideas are sustainable and have preserved and thrive and go on is because the method of error correction has not been disabled for those ideas, and they have blossomed, they have thrived like science. So we need to create institutions, systems, and structures that allow the means of error correction to flourish so that we can have the best possible society for the most people. And the only way to do it, there's only one way to do that. You have to maintain a robust criticism. You have to maintain cognitive liberty, which we spoke about, which is your first thing about what it is to be American.
I mean, it's the First Amendment, and it was for an obvious reason. The founders understood that profoundly. They understood the nature of that.
Yeah, I think thinking about like in this way, once you start talking about rights, you lose people. Again, the thing that's been popularized recently is 55%, some say 50, some say 54, 50, 60% of Americans cannot read at a 6th grade level. So how on earth are you going to get them to understand like cognitive liberty? They don't know the word liberty. I remember years ago.
You sound like an elitist now.
Dude, I know.
Well, people know liberty.
It's not.
They understand.
Years ago, I
take your point.
I was with a buddy, and we were at this fountain in Portland, and the sign said, no waiting. And I said to him, dude, there's no way that people know what the word waiting is. He's like, yeah, everybody knows the word waiting. I just went around and asked people, what's the word waiting? No one knows what the word waiting is. So instead of thinking about cognitive liberty or all these ideas that nobody's understanding. Remember, 60% of the people don't read at a 6th grade level. Just say, is it possible to make criticisms? Because if you can criticize things, you can improve it. That's a much simpler way for people to understand the idea. It's a much simpler way to explicate the idea. Even explicate is a big word. To explain the idea. That's to me. Sorry, just real quick.
Keep going.
But I think to me that's really important about what we need to do, not only as Americans but as a civilization in the West. That's like the continuation to me of the Enlightenment project. We need to make sure that our institutions enshrine those values. Do not block the road of inquiry.
I want to
push back all you want.
No, I want to push into this because this is the area where we simultaneously probably agree profoundly and might be diverging in the way we think, or I can at least play that one version of a different path or a kind of thought process that's a little different. So I want to make sure I'm going to repeat what I'm hearing you say, so I make sure I'm hearing it clearly. Error correction, criticism, discourse,
dialogue.
So long as the society is free to have like that there is no hate speech, there is no rule against anything. You can say, I'm going to argue for Nazism. I'm going to argue for Hitler. I'm going to actually come to the public square and make my case for why Mein Kampf is the greatest piece of writing.
100%.
If you have that, then I'll add on and say, you get to leverage the wisdom of crowds in a certain fundamental. That the wisdom of crowds is actually discourse at scale. Okay, why does Wikipedia, outside of some of the pages that have been perverted by political
Wikipedia is ideologically captured cesspool, but keep going.
But like if you go to like the Wikipedia page
that's
for
actually,
something not...
Yeah, but that's actually a great example that refutes your point. It's not the wisdom of crowds. It's the wisdom of a few people who have managed to manipulate and hijack the system because they themselves are ideologically captured. But preserving the method of error correction, I think, is like if you want a society that flourishes, you have to enshrine that as a fundamental principle. That is a first principle.
So this is where, okay, so yeah, basically, it's what you're arguing for, as I'm hearing it, is like what Jonathan Rauch.
Yep, the Constitution of Knowledge.
Yeah,
correct.
In like Kindly Inquisitors.
Kindly Inquisitors is great book.
Liberal science. There's no final authority. There were sort of three principles of that, but essentially it's we never know what the final truth is. We always have to hash it out.
It's provisional. It's provisional.
Any criticism can always be raised. You can't just say, well, because that's not right.
Because God said so. Because God said so.
So, yeah, sure, for sure. Yeah, that would be a piece of it. So here would be my proviso on that.
Please.
And that is I have this model that I've been playing with and thinking about, and it's not even uniquely mine. In a lot of ways, it's Nassim Taleb's from his book, The Black Swan, but I'm applying it in a particular context. And that is that your liberal science is what Jonathan Rauch called that. Liberal, open. Liberal is open. That liberalism, not American left-wing politics, but liberalism as in like the Scottish Enlightenment and the Magna Carta and the things that constitute the American founding principles, that liberalism. That is a boat, this is the analogy, that is a boat designed specifically to be able to sail in, I'm just going to say, a Christian ocean.
Oh God, I so disagree.
Well, let me play this out, and then I want you to attack this. So why am I saying that? Well, this is an evolution in my own thinking that I'm working through actively.
Please. Yeah.
The premise that all men are created equal is fundamentally, it might not be on a global scale uniquely Christian. You can probably find, like, Buddha said anyone can reach enlightenment. So there's aspects of this, of a certain kind of universal dignity that I think you can find in places. But as a matter of course, as a matter of history, the history of the West, the history of the Enlightenment, that is very much a Christian phenomenon. And you could say a Judeo-Christian if you want. That's a little bit of a buzzword, but it's not false. It's like there's a Jewish ethics that
sure
Jesus had. He was a Jew. He was a rabbi of a sort. But this basic assertion that is made by the radical revolution of Christendom is that human dignity is not material, and it is not actually up for grabs through discourse. It is actually if I can be super techie sounding, an axiomatic presupposition of liberty and liberalism. That liberalism needs that assumption. That's the ocean that the boat is floating in. The assumption that we can debate this, and if you say you're stronger than me, you're doing jujitsu, I'm not, so you can probably choke me out and kill me. I'm just going to assume that, even though, I've got an age advantage on you, but you've got a skill advantage. Yeah. Let's say you're able to kill me through brute strength. That's been the oldest rule in the book. Forget this talk and, we're going to debate in the public square like Socrates. No, yeah. The real rules of the game have always been power and hierarchy and might makes right. That's actually been, and tribe, that's been the thing. Slavery, universally practiced. The notion that all men are created equal, that is a metaphysical claim. That is the oceans. And in that ocean, this the founders, I think it was Adams, that this Constitution was only designed for a moral people and is unfit for any other kind. That's a paraphrase. But that actually is the necessary waters. That the reason why you can't find a single Islamic country that's successful and has liberalism, number one. And you can't find I believe, fact check me in the comments if I'm wrong about this. I'm just going to quote Wes Huff, who said this, and I think he's right. I don't think you can find a single abolitionist movement in the history of this planet that's not Christian. They're all Christian. They were Christian. They were rooted in a metaphysical assumption of human dignity, and the human dignity comes before the error correction of free speech and criticism. And so I think that is the challenge of our time.
What's that in that sentence?
Well, that is, we have, there is some resurgence of religiosity in America and among Gen Z men in particular. And that I like that as a Catholic, as a believer in Christ, but that this notion that we can have a kind of purely rational enlightenment now, Steven Pinker, up and to the right goes the graph thing, without the essentially metaphysical truth claim of all men are created equal as a matter of fact, as a kind of baseline. Why? Because we have souls.
Okay, so
I don't buy it.
Is it possible to have the all men are created equal without Christendom, like Hindus, secular Swedes?
Well, secular Swedes are living parasitically off Christendom. That would be my first. That would be my answer to
you'd
that.
say it's a legacy.
Yeah, I think it's a cut flower. Hinduism. As I understand it, even the term Hindu and Hinduism is like a British imposition on trying to observe the cultural, religious context of India.
Rajiv Malhotra has some great stuff with that.
But even more broadly, I think the caste system was there for thousands of years. The notion of all men are created equal is not an Indian.
So do you think then, is the boat? I just want to make sure I have this right. Is the boat individual liberties and cognitive liberty and freedom and et cetera?
The boat is the Enlightenment principles.
Okay, so you think that the boat can only float in a Christian ocean,
or something like it. Maybe there's some other thing that works that keeps it afloat. But I think when that water comes out,
it can't live. I'm just trying to figure it out. It can't live in a secular ocean. It can't.
I'm unconvinced. I think that one of the reasons why wokeism is an example of the boat, of the tide coming out and the boat being on land and suddenly being purposeless, because I don't need, what is this all men are created equal? No, there's an intersectional hierarchy based on essentially old school barbaric pagan tribalism that's been with us for tens of thousands of years. That's what wokeism is. It's a basically return to child sacrifice of
the pre-medieval.
It's primitive. It's primitive and pre-medieval.
Right. Okay, so part of the problem with this is that the ocean in which the boat is placed, I'm trying to maintain the metaphor so it doesn't break down, but the people in the ocean would say they don't want the boat there. I can think of the 11 societies currently, fact check this, that the punishment for apostasy is death. So they don't want, they don't.
Talking about Islam?
Yeah, they don't want the boat to float in the ocean. So
that's making my point. They don't have the boat. They don't have the boat.
No.
They don't have the ocean or the boat.
I'm not saying that, and I don't want to be put in the impossible position of defending something I don't believe about Islam more broadly, even though there is broadly liberal Islamic societies. The question is, can you have the boat in an ocean that's not Christian? I mean, let's just think through that together. Like, so when I gave you the example of Sweden, and you said, so I used the word legacy. It's basically they're living off of the past, of what got them there.
Well, let's look at Europe more broadly. Let's look at the retrenchment that we're seeing in real time of the very right that you're saying is essential, freedom of speech and expression.
Yeah.
So the Germans, which were the hub of intellectual excellence, they were the par excellence of academia, of scientific discovery.
Yeah.
They were the powerhouse of Europe prior to World War II. They are now arresting people for hurty words on social media. Yeah, so the Brits.
Right. And Vance's speech in Munich was one of the best speeches since Mr. Gorbachev tear down this wall.
So this would be, I would put this in our debate. I would put this in my column of out goes the water of Christendom, and the boat now looks ridiculous, and the legal institutions start to revert to something that doesn't respect the sanctity of the individual and the rights that spring from that assumption. And so the UK and Germany, which really are the two hubs of Western civilization in Europe,
they
are the worst of the worst.
Yeah, that's why I shorted the euro, but that's aside. So I wonder if you could have a boat without an ocean that didn't go anywhere. If you could have a society that was, I mean, could it emerge ex nihilo? Like, could it emerge from nothing, or do you need water to build the boat in the first place? I'm trying to extend the metaphor.
Well, let me extend it for a sec.
Please.
So where I get that from is Nassim Taleb's book talks about the fact that it's a kind of an emergent order concept, that that the ocean designs the boat.
Yeah.
Quite literally, that there are all these things that were boat attempts at the bottom of the ocean.
Okay,
so the boat that floats is defined by the water.
Okay, hold on. So just before I lose the thought, so is this all Christianity or just certain flavors of Christianity? Like, would this be in Pentecostalism? Would this be in Mormonism, if you consider that Christianity? Would this be in Southern Baptism?
I'm going to stick, I'm going to get in deep water real fast on this kind of thing. So I'm going to stick to something that at least I have some relatively recent sense of, which is the basic premise. I mean, like, as I understand it, Christ is asked, what are the laws? And he does the shorthand, a shortcut from the laws of Moses, the 10 commandments. And he basically says there's two. Love God and love your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
Your neighbor. All people. And St. Paul talks about love. I go to Mass.
Do you think those preceded Christianity? And then Christ just latched onto them? It's kind of Socrates' Euthyphro dilemma. Is it pious because God loves it, or does God love it because it's pious?
Well, I think that's an interesting question. I think I don't think I'm a.
That's why you bought me a great dinner to be here.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think the thing is, like, what you don't have in at the time of ancient Greece or in Plato and Socrates themselves is a recognition that all humankind has equal dignity. They definitely don't. They are perfectly comfortable with things that relegate people to castes. And so they didn't have that.
Yeah.
So whatever they did believe, whatever Platonic forms of the good, the true, and the beautiful that Aristotle was aiming for,
all right, they didn't
have that.
Let me throw this out to you before I lose it. So
please.
That's one of my first principles. That's one of your first principles. That's one we agree. Is it possible that we're wrong about that?
And that there isn't universal human dignity? That's not a thing? I mean, I think literally it's not a thing. I think literally it's not. Like, materially it's not. Right?
Well, yeah, material it can't be. You have to import something else and superimpose a moral structure on it. But because I'm trying to think of, because that really is one of the bedrock beliefs that I hold. Could we be wrong about that?
How would you know?
Okay.
How would you know?
So let's just say, just please run with me in this thought experiment. So there are two universes, one that has God and one that does not have God. Let's just say you don't know which one we're in, but for the purpose of this conversation strictly, we're living in a universe without God.
Like, as a matter of the truth.
Yeah, let's just
we die and there's nothing.
Yeah, just for 5 minutes.
Sure. Please.
Solely for the purpose of conversation. Could we be wrong about the fact that humans are entitled to dignity? That all human lives have worth and value?
Well, I mean, I think this is my point.
That you need God to have that.
You have to prove that that's true.
And you think having a God proves that? Like, if you lived in the other universe, that would itself, like, de facto prove that all human beings had dignity?
I think so. There's a couple things that I can go on.
Okay.
This. One place I won't go is the semantics of what do we mean by dignity.
That's fine. Don't go there.
I'll just assume, like,
it's a waste of time. We're in agreement.
Yeah, we're in agreement. Dignity basically means something like the golden rule, something like I don't hurt you, I don't steal from you.
Yeah.
You respect each other.
I got it. Yeah, we don't need to talk about it. I got it.
Okay, so then the question is, where would we get that from if not an assertion from a metaphysical place.
Okay, so here's my problem. And if there is an error in my reasoning, I am begging you to correct me. So I have struggled with this for a long time. If there are two universes, one without God and one with God, you couldn't know which one you were in. You'd have to kind of have some kind of begging the question. Like you'd have to say, well, the universe without God couldn't exist, but that's just not true. Like, so everything you're saying is hinged to the fact that there's a God. But if you're in the other universe and you're saying that those things wouldn't be true, it makes, to me, personally, it makes it seem like not that those things weren't believed, but they don't have a kind of universal I literally mean universal gravitas. Like they don't have a reason to believe. Like it's kind of like the syllogism, abortion is wrong. How do you know that abortion is wrong? There's a God. Abortion is wrong. Well, what if there was no God? Then abortion wouldn't be wrong, but we know abortion's wrong because there's a God. So there's something like, there's something specious in that. There's something attractively false in that. Like there's something to me about, you're hinging this whole idea of dignity on a God. And if there were no God, would people be entitled to dignity?
Why would they be?
Okay. So that's my problem with this whole thing. My problem with this whole argument is that to me demeans, cheapens, and weakens the view.
Why?
Because your moral foundation should be true independently of whether or not there is a supernatural metaphysical entity, a governing first cause. And if it's not, there's something that's, I don't know, it's Ersatz value isn't exactly the right word, but there's something about it's just fake.
Let me push you on this.
It demeans the whole concept.
Okay, so where do you get the premise of universal human dignity given? Let's make sure we're on the same page.
Yeah.
Given that people aren't all physically, materially, cognitively equal. That's a fact. Morally and behaviorally equal in any sense. Like there's horrible scumbags, even if they're not outright criminals. There's at least people. There's nasty people. There's stupid people.
Yeah, and I don't think that they should be tortured to death.
So, just make your case for the assumption or the assertion. How is it not simply an assertion that every person should have the right to speak freely or to have something like dignity and rights? Where are you getting that from?
So
that was not believed on Earth until relatively recently.
Let me throw something out to you, and I hope you don't think I'm trying to sidestep the issue, because I'm sincerely not. I personally think it's a moral view, but let me just say, okay, let's just assume for a moment that it's not a moral view. You know what it is? It's a practical view. Societies just cohere better in democracies and democratic institutions. Now you could say, well, that's kind of myopia. You're in 2025 and it's just been, no, but when people have collective ownership of the society in which they live, it just yields practical results, and things that yield
by what, according to what metric?
Well, nobody wants to have dental pain. Nobody wants the secret police to come in their house at 4 a.m. and take them out, rape their wife, and start torturing their kids until they extract information from them. People want due process. People want Miranda rights. People want freedom of assembly.
People liked slavery. Like majorities throughout all of human history on every continent.
Yeah.
So that's an appeal to majority views.
No, it's not. No, it's actually not. In Plato's Republic, he says people do not. God, what's the quote?
People do not want these things, though, Peter. People were going along with lockdowns by majorities in this country out of fear. Fear makes people do crazy shit.
Right. So if you want to say that something is a moral value, the moment that you invoke a kind of supernatural anchor to the value, like, well, you have to have the fact that Jesus walked on water, because if he didn't walk on water, then you shouldn't believe all the other things. And I'm telling you, you can believe many of the propositions in Christianity and simply, like myself, not believe anybody walked on water. Like, those things are not conjoined. I know people want to conjoin them.
I want to stay on. I want to hear that we're really in the fun stuff now. I want to hear your proof for the notion of dignity and the right to expression, protected speech,
Okay.
protected a protected forum for this for speech.
So there are two paths that we could go down. Do we agree that practically that makes for a better society?
Practically?
Yeah. I mean, do you believe it's like the final minutes in the Star Trek episode Mirror Mirror, you know, when Kirk is saying to the alternative Spock, like he's explaining that these are values, these are sustainable values, that if these are the bedrock fundamental roots of a society, people will prosper. Things will be better for you. You'll ameliorate suffering. I mean, if you can agree upon the practical, you can make reasonable inferences to the moral.
Okay.
But if you want to argue to me that those things are not, you won't have better societies as a result of having freedom of speech, freedom of the press, I'm willing to listen to that argument. I don't think it's true.
I might not be right about this, or I might be missing something. I think you've smuggled in a circular assumption about individual dignity in that.
Okay.
When I say practical, because what I think your meaning is by practical is something like utilitarian math. Everyone is better and happier than they would otherwise be.
No, I mean the society. Well, for
why
one,
do I care about
the society is
if
more
I don't
like
care about the individuals being happy?
So again, I'm not talking about the moral. I'm talking about just the practical. Democratic societies, I would argue, and maybe you say we don't have a long enough track record, and I'm willing to listen to that argument, but they're more sustainable. People have ownership in their institutions. They have more governance over their lives. They have more individual possibility. They're not governed by monarchs. They're not governed by kind of rank tribalism of what your father did, you have to do. There are more options in democratic systems. There's the perception that when people buy into the system in a participatory democracy, there's a perception that it's fair, like that you can influence elections through your vote. You can speak on, you can get that's why, in the United States, we don't have speakers corners, because we don't need them, because we have the First Amendment. So we don't, so there's something inherently validating of individual dignity and decency when you construct a society around democratic principles and human dignity that allows that society. What are you saying? I'm gonna smuggle something in?
You said there's something that I don't mean to interrupt, because
no, interrupt. Go.
You smuggled dignity in the definition of it.
Okay.
I know it was just words,
okay,
but I actually think you are.
Okay,
I think
so
that's really important.
So if I've made a mistake in my reasoning, let me know. When you treat people with dignity, bracket the moral claim for a second. Just look at the practical implication of treating people with dignity. That enables that system, and whether or not you're in the top tier or the bottom tier, that's John Rawls' argument, that enables that system and society to propel itself. So you can say you don't agree with that.
No. I do, but here's my.
Because totalitarianism has a built-in expiration date. We just don't know what it is.
So
authoritarianism has the same expiration date.
I don't know that, maybe my history isn't good enough to make the argument here, but we have had on this planet empires spanning more than double the existence of the United States.
I'm thinking Rome.
Without the assumption of the dignity we're talking about.
Correct.
So, there is a basic problem that I think you're
got it. I see where you're going with this. Got it.
But let me finish it so you can see if I'm off base here. But I think it's like literally Kurt Gödel mathematical in nature, which is you are attempting, this is the ocean and boat, you are attempting to say that we should acknowledge and treat human dignity as a fact because it makes it work for that fact. You're trying to have a system of moral reasoning that is fundamentally logically circular. You don't have a source of that dignity other than measurements of success on the basis of that dignity.
Okay.
So you have that you've smuggled in the yardstick in a circular sense. Like, for example, why wouldn't it be the case that the survival of the governance of the empire is actually the yardstick? And so human dignity might not be the thing to use there. It might actually be in at odds with it, because you lose coherence, you lose the structures that maintain power and order. It might be that order and dynasty is better.
Yeah, I'm thinking of Isaac Asimov's Foundation. Okay, so we got two things. That was my practical argument. I don't think to make that argument work, I don't think that we can change the word decency. I don't think one needs to make the moral case for decency. I just think that it's a strictly practical argument. In fact, that's what one of the Christian apologists' criticism of the new atheist movement is that they weren't criticizing moral things. They were criticizing, it was a practical phenomenon.
Can I push on this for one more time?
100%.
So
please.
I don't think I think you're wrong on how you're thinking, how you're using the word practical.
Okay.
So very simply.
Yeah.
When I hear practical, here's what I mean.
Yeah.
There is a goal in mind.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of ways to get there. And to be practical, you figure out the best way to get to the goal.
Yeah. You're saying you don't know that I'm smuggling in what I think the goal should be.
Yes. You have individual human flourishing for its own sake as your goal. And therefore you're saying we should assume that that's worthwhile, that that's inherent, because that practically leads to its outcome. That's what you're saying. Am I missing that?
Okay. So let me ask you a question. How do we get from a creator of the universe to human dignity? I mean, you need an intervening book. You need
So.
And I'm not saying this to avoid this conversation. I'm just trying to figure out because I haven't created the moral argument for anything. I've just been making a practical one. But
do you think that I'm hitting on something here, though, when you say practical, that you've smuggled in the
I do. But I think to have any conversation, you have to have a basic assumption of we want people to live. We don't want to immiserate people. We don't want to,
you recognize that there's been plenty of societies, and probably, I think the majority of societies have operated with assumptions that there's plenty of people you can immiserate to serve, to be treated as a means to your own end, right?
And here's the difference. The difference is that I'm saying that I am retaining my ability to say that those societies, the way that they constructed the systems and the governance was wrong, because there's a matter of fact about it. And human dignity is just a matter of fact. And if you deny that, if you're in the killing fields, then I'm retaining my ability to say that something is morally wrong without a supernatural agent.
Let me lay out fast how I understand,
please,
where I think it comes from.
Okay.
As a Catholic, I fundamentally believe that the origin of the universe is a creation. That it is a creation more or less as we are offered in the Bible. I don't mean that literally, like it was created in 7 days and the earth is only 6,000 years old, but that something like what we seem to know about it from a physics perspective, that there was nothing and then bam, there was something.
Yeah.
And then there was a second Big Bang, which was the move from inanimate atoms to life. That was as big a bang and as much of a mystery as the others. So I believe in that fundamental assertion that there is a God, and then I believe that the basic story of Christ is true. I believe that. I believe that actually, not only literally that he was a man that walked, but that he was a man that came and did the things that we're told he did, that he was crucified and actually resurrected and is a uniquely Son of God figure. And I believe all that.
Okay.
Now, he delivers a message. And that message fundamentally is that the last shall be first, that we are all equal. That he walked it. Because he's like, okay, who am I going to collect around me as my posse? Tax collectors, prostitutes formerly possessed by demons, and this ragtag bunch of lunatics. Simon the Zealot, who's like a lunatic trying to overthrow Rome by force. And that he exists to do that specifically to show us that that is the right way to live. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And that you should come through me to salvation. So I believe that fundamentally. I believe that that is actually true, like literally true. And then I think that the reason why maybe that he came when he did, because that's an interesting, weird question. Why did he come when he did? That there was something about that moment in the process of human development that was set up for that to be a really great moment. Why? Well, first of all, because you have this peak of the Roman Empire in which, if this was going to be the unique moment to bring this message down to this fledgling creature, this creation, and have it transmit this news, this good news, that's a really great time to do it. You have enough ability for that meme to spread, that it could spread, that it could not only spread, but it could survive 2,000 years of assault and still remain the belief of a third of the population of the planet Earth, even now that we're 8 billion people instead of whatever, it was probably 100 million at the time of Christ at best. So that's crazy that it even friggin' survived that. And that actually the fact that that story, that assertion, love your neighbor as yourself. Why? Because this is your nature, because you are created in the image of your creator. And so you have, by virtue of being created, something special that is a fundamental axiomatic assertion only of that fact. That is special. That is a revolution. And like, if the funny thing is, as you know, I part of the reason why I moved away from being excited about my faith, because I inherited it. I was Italian Catholic, went to Catholic school for 12 years. I was like, okay, fine, yeah, I'm Catholic, whatever. And then the priest scandals and all the horrible shit. And I'm like, I don't know how I feel about this. Maybe there's no God. I don't know. Well, part of why I've come back to this is partly seeing how nuts our society has become with a radical waning of those assumptions.
Yeah, you're not the only one.
I'm like, wait a second. Okay, the Enlightenment is that boat. And that tide goes out and it gets crazy. And the old assertions, the old pre-Christian assertions come back because they're actually materially true. It is materially true that might makes right. That if I can punch you and shut you up, I win. And that my selfish gene will keep going. I can have a harem. I can be Genghis Khan. That's the selfish gene. So get the selfish gene. That's a stupid idea to underpin a Western civilization whose actual underpinning is a fundamentally axiomatic assumption about human dignity that has no antecedent, that can't be justified on any other basis than something akin to just being true for its own sake, or because we are a particular kind of thing, which you might as well be saying the same thing. When you say human dignity is good for its own sake, you are literally saying we are created in the image of God, and what is God in the eye of Christendom? Love. That is all it is. You go to a Catholic mass and that's all you friggin' hear from the priests. Love. Love your neighbor. Love. God is love, is the assertion of Christianity. God is love. And you get these technical things that you can say, like, well, that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook. But, well, why is there like this? Why is there the Son? And why is there this other thing, the Holy Spirit, and it's in this Trinity? And it's like, well, the explanation, as I understand it, and I'm not some perfectly great apologist. I barely can recite this. But, well, because love is fundamentally in relation. There is no love if you're alone. oh, I love myself. That doesn't mean it. That doesn't actually really mean anything. That's some word play. Love is to love another. And so if God is love, then there is some notion of personhood. That's the Trinity thing. Maybe it's an imperfect approximation of the actual reality. But, I look towards the universal language of math. I brought this up with Brett and Heather. There's all these other things that point to this being literally true. The universality of math, the indestructible nature of information in our universe, the magical of quantum physics and what the hell's going on there. There's so much stuff that points towards my belief system being at least defensible. And I think if not, and certainly I think more defensible for human dignity than just because. And now,
okay, well, there's just so much there. It's difficult to process all of that. Just a few things to pick up on that you said. So remember that if you're in one universe or the other, if you're in a universe with no God, would mathematical axioms still hold?
It's not clear. It's not clear that you'd even have them. I mean, Christopher Hitchens said that one of the hardest arguments to contend with against the creator God is the fine tuning of the universe.
Yeah, I don't think that. I think that's silly. The answer to that is silly. Well, no disrespect to Christopher. Well, Shermer has it pegged. He's speaking tomorrow, actually. He's debating with Ayan, of all people. It's not that we're fine-tuned to the universe. The universe is fine-tuned to us. It's that we are fine-tuned to the universe. So that we exist in this particular instantiation, and we've come to exist given the fundamental conditions of the universe. But going back to what you said before, so I mean, there was so much. First of all, let me just say, I think that's a lovely way to view the world. I think that's a lovely way to view. I genuinely do. I think that's a lovely way to view humanity. I think it's a lovely way to conceptualize human dignity and truth. And I tell you this as someone who likes you, and I would, that's the difference between me being nice and being kind. If I was to be nice, but I think that's in error. But I think it is a lovely. All right, it's a lovely way to think.
Have at it, man. I mean, I don't believe things in spite of my cognitive capabilities, right? So have at it.
So I do think that if more people would have that attitude, society would be far better off. But I don't think that any of those things make it true. So, okay. So again, there's just a lot to unpack here. Here's what's really disturbing to me about that. There's one uniquely disturbing element of that. Okay, actually, let me step back and ask you a prior question. If there were no God, would there be a reason to be kind to people?
So, is it possible to have a kind of utilitarian calculus for your own good? Perhaps, right? So I can construct the argument to the other side, which is to say, why are we here? We are here because why are we here? Despite not being like rhinos, we're kind of frail, kind of soft, kind of easy to kill.
Yeah.
We're here because we're groupish. This is the Ev Psych. This is like Pinker's height atheism.
Yeah.
Both of whom I love.
Yeah.
We're here because we're groupish, and actually our selfish gene is a product of a kind of group survival, and we are the creature that was able to adaptively survive as a group. And so we have altruism because of groups. We have mirror neurons because of groups.
Answer the question. Answer the question. You're in the universe that there's no God. Is there should one be kind to people? See, this is terrifying. This is terrifying to me. This is terrifying to me. I'm like almost terrified now. And I'm thinking like, oh, thank God you believe in God.
No.
Because like that, like,
I'm answering this seriously for a reason.
Yeah.
It's easy for me
with
my own comforts to say yes because it makes me feel good. It's easy for that. That's an easy answer. It's easy. Well, of course, because I want you to treat me nice.
Well, there's something fundamental in that.
Except that that's not always true. And history's proven that that's not mostly true. That actually my selfish interest to live well has historically generally come about through something like exploitation and subjugation. I don't mean that in some Marxist sense.
No, I hear you.
I mean that literally.
Yeah.
That most of history tells us that there's just been, most people didn't think that way.
Yeah.
So I think like the fact that I feel naturally saying a kind of utilitarian golden rule, I think we're in the boat, and the boat came aground, but we're still on it. We didn't like abandon the boat yet. We're still in it.
So let me ask you this question. If I could construct a reason for why human dignity matters absent of God, or if I could construct a reason for why you should be kind to people absent of God, what would that say about your God belief?
It would weaken that
moral
argument.
Yeah.
It would. It would weaken it.
Would it weaken your belief in God?
No, it wouldn't, because there's more to it than that. And some of it's experiential, some of it's about things that maybe you might say that's just pattern recognition, these miracles you see. I mean, but I like there's things that are, you're a parent.
I am.
You know, this Dad Saves America.
2 kids.
There's things about the nature of the experience of creation through the birth of your children that are beautiful, magical, in ways that are not just about being rational, especially as a man.
Yeah.
Because as a man, we're like hardwired to go spread our seed around everywhere.
Well, I don't know about you.
No,
Speak for yourself.
Literally, we are wired for it. There's
Those
a reason,
guys over there, maybe.
There's a reason why like a 75-year-old can still produce offspring, because we're sort of that's like, we're the small gamete group, so we can spread around, and it's less costly.
Yeah.
So the biology of that doesn't. Why do I find beauty in anything? That's weird. Beauty's weird. Beauty's magical. Beauty's way harder to explain than a lot of other stuff.
And
I think it's
so
tied to the nature of being a created being that loves creation.
So if
my dog doesn't love creation. Okay. My dog takes a shit and doesn't care.
Right. So
I think that's important.
If there were a neurological explanation for that, like if there were a neurological explanation for that, would you change your mind?
What do you mean?
About beauty?
That we can trace.
So again, in going in this model, a universe without God and a universe with God. In a universe without God, there's no beauty, even if there are agents.
I don't know. I mean,
other people don't recognize beauty because they don't have a kind of beauty sensor.
It's
Or you don't just accept. It is totally fine to just say, I don't accept this dichotomy.
No, I
just think it's a helpful heuristic to.
Well, I guess you could. I think if you want to say, look, you're playing a God of the Gaps game by saying.
No, that's not what I was going to say. No, I think to be blunt, I think the argument is far more wrong than that, because it just starts with these assumptions that can be explained by naturalistic phenomena. There's a naturalistic explanation for these things. Well, math, beauty, like now dignity is harder. Dignity is more difficult because it imports a bunch of other.
Well, I think dignity is the central challenge. These others are tangential.
I would agree.
I think
because it participates in multiple categories at the same time.
Well, and I think we have a history that is. I believe that the basic history told of why did the West succeed in the way that it did?
Can I give you again my thing? It preserved the method of error correction. And you're going to say that the boat for the method of error correction is Christianity.
It's even deeper than that, actually, and more profound, and also more like simple.
Okay.
Who created Oxford? Who created it?
Christians. It's a Christian university initially.
Who created universities as a concept, as an institution?
Well, that's kind of jerry-rigging the system because everybody was a Christian back then. Or at least they had to profess to be a Christian.
It wasn't people that happened to live in a Christian society. It was the actual church in Bologna, in Italy, was the first university.
Right. So that's cheating that's cheating a little bit because
it's not.
There were no atheists back then. There were no. It's cheating the system. But okay. No, but I'll give it to you.
The reason why I'm calling to that history is because I grew up in a culture that said that there's this battle between science and faith and that the church like tortured Galileo, and isn't that the perfect example of why the church is so bad? And then you read about the actual history, and that's like kind of horseshit. And it's like, well, Francis Bacon was a Catholic, and actually the universities and the centers of learning were all instituted by Catholic monks.
Yeah, okay.
But they had a premise.
Yeah.
And their premise was that cuts to this human dignity core.
Yeah.
We are a created being, and the creation we live in, and the causes of it, and the way it works is beautiful and good, and to understand that is to understand ourselves and to understand our creator. And so
why make that move to the creator though? I keep coming back to that because that's the one thing, in spite of these commonalities that we share, I'm still stuck at the creator thing.
But I'm just saying, like, you have replaced creator with nothing. You replaced creator with human dignity because human dignity. But curiosity because curiosity. Do you think you've made a good argument for human dignity that's not utilitarian?
I haven't even begun. I remember I said there were two parts.
Yeah. So good. All right, have at it. I've made my case.
One was the practical, the other one was the moral. I was attempting to say that, I don't know how well I succeeded, but I was attempting to say that there are practical reasons for wanting to enshrine human dignity and institutionalize that. For example, the Constitution, certain rights, and there are moral reasons to do that, which is on the other side of the argument.
So do you accept that,
and again,
at least that I've maybe put a ding in your practical side, because I think practical smuggles in the assumption? Because I know I don't want to circle back on this too much and get lost, and this is going to be a 3-hour conversation, and that's fine. But
that's fine if it is.
Do you think it?
We would need about another bottle of wine, but I don't think it puts a ding in it, because you have to start with some assumptions. Like, I just don't understand this, and I'm not saying you do this, but so many times I'll frequently have a conversation with someone, and they'll throw something out there like it's a gotcha. Like, oh, gotcha, you have a first premise. Yeah, but you have to have, I use language too. Like, my use of words, some kind of a linguistic infrastructure, that's not a gotcha. So you have to have first principles. Now, you can say that any first principle that you have smuggles in a certain assumption.
There's a point of this about the practical part. I think fundamentally, and maybe you'll disagree with this, that utilitarianism.
That was partially a utilitarian argument that I made.
Right. So the greatest good to the greatest many. Peter Singer, reducing suffering. However you want to say what utilitarianism is, it has some assumptions in it.
True.
That I'm not a utilitarian. I think it's a tool, but it is not.
We're all a little utilitarian.
We're all little.
Yeah.
But it is not. It isn't a complete moral philosophy for this reason. And it cuts to the practical problem.
Yeah.
If all you have is utility, and you're going to say, this is all we need. I'm Jeremy Bentham. All we need is utilitarian math.
You throw people, like in the ovens? Is that where it's going?
You do. Well, you do that. But not only that, the assumption you've made is that you can measure utility. That's the actual assumption you've made.
Yeah, okay.
He tried to do it.
This is another conversation. I'm happy to go down this rabbit hole.
I'm just saying, he made there's an assumption there. we can measure utility.
Yeah.
In fact, there was efforts to try to do what's the minimal unit of it? It's a util. Well, what's that?
Right. That's called the calculus objection. Is that you never so
it ends up being
assign
communism.
arbitrary values to things, and then you weigh those out. Like
it's communism. It literally is like then you can centrally plan society, because if you can have a moral system that's utilitarian and there's no other thing, there's no other like smuggled in assumptions like, yeah, but utilitarianism bound by rights, so I'm a rights utilitarian. Well, where do you get the rights from? I don't know, God.
Yeah.
Negative
utilitarians, but yeah, sure.
I think that all ends up begging the question: where do we do the constraint so that we don't have communism or Nazis? Like that really, it gets there real fast.
Yeah.
So, okay, make your moral case.
Okay, so I mean, there's so much going on in the conversation. So for those of you who are not watching, that listening to this, I've been using my left hand to make the practical case and my right hand to make the moral case. Yes. So I haven't made the moral case yet. So my first argument was that you can have a practical case to have a moral value, even if the moral value isn't correct or true or whatever word one would want to use, because that will help the society. And it gives the people on the very top and the very bottom, this is John Rawls' idea that I'm kind of smuggling in, but it will give them a reason to want the society to cohere and sustain itself. It will also make the society function better. Now, I will yield one thing when I think you said, does it ding your argument? I will say that this hasn't been sufficiently empirically tested yet. The history of democracy is very short, and I will say it wobbled for a little while very recently. And I've been thinking about that. I've been reading a wonderful book about the history of China. Okay, so now for the moral argument. Why should we treat people with dignity? Well, there are many reasons for this. The first reason is that I'm sure you're going to say this is problematic. And so if you say so, I'm not going to construct the argument because it's not worth the time. But that I would myself want to be treated with dignity. And I think you want a universal rule so that you're outside of a system and saying that. So this is John Rawls' fundamental idea, which I think is brilliant. He wrote in The Theory of Justice. So that construct a society so that your enemy assigns you your social place. So if you don't know the position in society, you don't know if you're going to be black or gay or poor or tall or midget, whatever it is.
The veil of ignorance. If you're behind
correct.
A veil of ignorance and you had to roll the dice on the outcome, which kind of society would you like to be in?
That is exactly correct. And so that is a way to figure something out without an ancient book, a supernatural entity, or what have you. It is a way to construct a fair society. The example I use today at the University of Austin is like, if you want to, drug users when they want to cut up Coke, or kids when they want to cut up, shouldn't say cut up, scoop out ice cream or make pizza, the chooser, the person who divides does not choose. Like there's something just intrinsic in that process that guarantees fairness, right?
Okay.
So we can do those things. We have access to those tools.
How are you judging that's the best outcome? Why is that?
It might not be the best outcome. It could be the outcome that, for example, the whole question could be an error. Like two fat people trying to, divide a pint of Haagen-Dazs. Whoever gets the smaller part yielded a better result. So I'm just saying there's a method or a process in a way to think about something that you do not have to have access to a supernatural being that still enables you to understand the concept of fairness. And I would even argue something more profound than that. It's like, have you watched these videos of these people with their dogs and they're giving like one dog a small bone and the other dog a big bone, and soon, or monkeys or bonobos, and the other creature like freaks out because eventually it's not fair. They see the disparity as a type of intrinsically unfair. I think you can rationally derive principles of fairness and, how to construct societies, how to construct institutions, basically don't be a dick to other people. I think you can construct ways of social intercourse and engagement and interactions that maintain the character of human decency and dignity and don't resort to something supernatural. And I don't think that those arguments are particularly difficult to make. And one more thing, I think if you do that, you then get the practical as well. It is just better to live in a society in which people aren't dicks to each other. It is just better to live in a society, you know, as in Auckland, and we're riding down those green scooters everywhere. You try that in Portland, everybody throws the scooters in the canal. They destroy everything. It's just better to live in a society. It's not only does it yield more practical, but we can figure it out externally that we should construct these kinds of societies. Does that make sense?
I understand it.
Okay.
What I'm struggling with
is
that it sounds like you made the exact same argument in two different ways.
Yeah, I made a practical one and a moral one.
Why do you call the Rawls thing moral? Why is that moral?
Because I think that when he talks about the idea of justice has an ancient pedigree, it goes back to the first three books of Plato's Republic. People, philosophers, and the history of the Western intellectual tradition have talked about justice, what it means to be just, what it means to construct just societies, etc. Rawls argues that justice is fairness. That is justice. And I think that's absolutely correct. That completely, that comports with my view. In fact, that is my view. That if you want to, so a just society, what kind of society ought we to have? What kind of society should we have? Well, we should have a fair society. Well, how do we construct fair societies? Well, the veil of ignorance.
Well,
the original
okay.
condition.
So I want to make sure I'm understanding that we're talking when you say fairness.
Yeah.
That we're on the same page about what that means. What is fairness there?
Well, I'll tell you what in this current cultural moment, I'll tell you what fairness is and is not, and then I'll drill down to the specificity across domains. Fairness is not equity.
Equal outcomes.
Yeah.
Why?
Well,
I mean, actually, the Rawlsian thing, veil of ignorance, is outcome-based. It's which society... Okay,
no,
behind
it's
the veil.
Opportunity-based. It's not outcomes-based. It's absolutely not outcomes-based. Well, it's providing everyone, he's very explicit about this, providing everyone with a public education of the first rate. It's a graduated income tax. Conservatives don't like it as opposed to a flat tax. So let's talk about that for a second. So when you say that you want to have a just society for Rawls and for me, I'm saying that you want to have a fair society. You can derive principles of justice for how to create systems in society based upon those systems that are fair. As a placeholder term, and you can disagree with this, we'll call systems that are fair good, and we'll call systems that are unfair bad. So already, if you accept that dichotomy, that we've enabled, that we have an ability to make a judgment about a way to treat people that's good or bad. Now let's talk about equity and equality. So we have been besieged by, there's no other way to say it, demented people who have argued that the way to construct, they don't really, if you read the literature, which I have extensively, they don't use the word fair necessarily. They said equitable systems. So equitable systems are systems in which the outcomes have been jerry-rigged. So they want certain outcomes, but they're not concerned with opportunities. They want outcomes in which people whose ancestors have been oppressed or slaved or victimized or marginalized, et cetera, as Kendi says, it's God, what's that quote? It's
about discrimination.
Yeah, it's
present. It's like past discrimination is solved by present discrimination.
Yeah.
And present discrimination is solved by future discrimination. Right. Therefore, discrimination's good.
Sorry, I'm getting a little tired. I need more wine.
Anti-racist equals racist.
Keep wine on this place. So when you talk about fair systems, so that's one thing that not having a God or a holy book enables you to do. And again, I realize that there are huge caveats in this. You want to create systems in which there's equality of opportunity, and then the chips can fall where they may. Because anybody can rationally derive that you want equality of opportunity. It's rationally drivable.
I think that's all false.
You do? Okay, tell me why. Because I'm...
Maybe that's too strong.
The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future. That's the quotation. Yeah.
So why do I say that? And maybe that's too strong. But
no. But I mean, I don't want to be wrong for one more second that I have to be the famous quotation.
There's a fair. Okay, let's talk about fairness.
Okay. Because that does relate to the decency.
There's two different. There's all these different ways of thinking about what is fair. So, if we're gonna play a game,
okay,
we're gonna play soccer, basketball. You name your favorite sport.
Jiu-jitsu.
Fine. Fair rules for the player are applied equally to the players and understood.
Correct.
To be such. And because they are equally applied to the players, the outcomes are actually unequal fundamentally. They must be, actually.
Correct.
Freedom and equality of outcome are actually always in conflict.
That's correct.
They are.
I wouldn't use the word freedom, but yeah, that's correct.
Well, like
equality of outcome means there's not. Yeah. Equality of opportunity means there have to.
I actually think the phrase this is this common phrase in sort of our ideas space in the right and left, like, oh no, equity is equality of outcome, as opposed to equality of opportunity. No, that's not true. There's no such thing as equality of opportunity. What the hell does that even mean? I had two parents who love me and still love me, and my dad still worries about me, and so does my mom. I have more opportunity by virtue of that than someone who doesn't. That's a fact. That can't be remedied for the person whose father left.
Completely agree.
So equality.
We're talking about remediating those. Look.
But let me just.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So what you end up with though is, forget equality of anything other than that the rules are applied equally to everyone. This is sort of Hayek's idea of sort of a generalization principle.
Correct.
So equal rules of the game produces the best outcomes. I think that's an empirical reality. If you have a game, as a matter of fairness, if we're going to, who's going to win the Super Bowl? Whoever's the best at playing the rules of football. Every one of those players is coming from different levels of opportunity. There's no equal opportunity worth shit. That's a bullshit idea.
Right.
Equal opportunity. It's a shorthand to try to attack equity and not deal with the harder fact that, everybody's starting from a different place and always will forever. We can never equalize the playing field.
I'm agreeing with you. We have no disagreement.
Right. But I think I'm emphasizing that because it's like a fallacy that sets up the other things. It's like giving away too much. So then the question is, why have equal rules apply? Why? Well, because we turn out better. That's actually a practical equivalent.
Okay.
You've constructed something that smuggles in equal treatment. Well, that's just dignity by another name.
Okay, so good. I'm glad you brought it back to dignity. So before we continue to the why, do you agree that the process of divorcing your interest, the veil of ignorance, and the original position will yield fair systems? It's kind of binary.
No, I don't think the veil of ignorance is good enough for that. I think it's an interesting thought exercise. It's utilitarian math. Do you want to be in a better society?
He says he's explicitly a deontologist, but so you don't think, and I'm hesitant to say this, but you don't think absent God there are better ways to reason to how to make fair systems. Now that's a different question to whether or not we should make fair systems at all.
Here's the crux of it for me.
Okay.
Reason.
I'm so happy you said that. Yeah, tell me what you mean by that, because that's what was running through my head.
So, what is reason? And what does it mean to be reasonable, or to be reality-based, or to be truth-based? We're not talking about atoms. We're talking about humans. We're talking about what gives rise to a better life. So how do I interrogate that scientifically? Well, I should probably start with some notion of an understanding of what the human is and how they work. That's the veil of ignorance. What kind of society would I want to live in as a human, given humans and what we are?
Okay.
And so that smuggles in a nature, a human nature.
Okay.
And so that begs the question, what is human nature? And why do we flourish in systems that treat us like we are equal? And why is it, when that happened, by virtue of Christendom, it unleashed us? Why did Christendom unleash us?
This is really important.
That happened. That's a historical fact.
Okay, this is super important. Place hold the term unleash, because let's come back to it. So the thing that was running through my mind that I thought you were going to say, or I thought you were going to go with this, is, okay, I'm going to grant you that this yields fair systems, but who gives a shit about fair systems? I want Islam. I'm not saying you do. I'm saying, like, one could say, I want surrender.
Well, that is true. Actually.
I couldn't possibly. Well, yeah, that's where I thought you were going to go. Like,
that's another way to attack it, is to say Islam is actually a totalizing worldview that doesn't have equality.
Render unto Caesar, right? Like, it separates church and state, etc. But I don't, like, I thought you were going to say fair systems are irrelevant when I can have whatever my God belief is. You know, I'm thinking of this case, Islam, but it certainly doesn't have to be that. So in that, if you accept that fairness or these thought experiments could yield, at least in principle, fair systems, then you could ask, well, why would one want that? Because a lot of people simply don't want that. They want some other systems. And so then the question would be, well, what do you do then, right? And so I guess my question to you is, that's when you would have to smuggle in your God belief, right? Like, you would have to smuggle in your God belief. You'd have to say, or maybe even be explicit about it. We want, what was the unleashed? Yeah, we want to unleash human potential. But there are many, like, I was listening to this, I have weird things I do in my free time, but I was listening to this Islamic cleric, and he was basically saying, listen, and this is very common in the Middle East in particular, you might be better at us from this perspective in economics or science or technology or math, or, the litany goes on. Mm-hmm. But we are better in religion. We are better in religion, and we have the truth. And I thought to myself, wow, that really is the postmodern condition, right? Like, you have all these tools of Western liberalism and the Enlightenment at your disposal, how to make better societies, error correct, all this stuff. And here's this guy saying that, he's stuck in some pre-medieval thought system, right? And so I guess that's my question to you. When you say that these things are grounded in Christendom, it's a very bizarre argument, but I'm just going to toss it out to you. It's a postmodern argument. Like, why would you want that unleashing?
I think it's actually a pre-modern argument, actually.
Yeah. Why would you want that unleashing? like, because isn't that isn't the very thing that you criticize me for an example of what you are guilty of? The unleashing, like, that comes smuggled in with certain assumptions. Did I make that clear?
Maybe. I think that one of the things that has really rocked my world, as someone who loves logic and loves philosophy, I didn't study it, but I've studied it as an adult more than I did. But I like logical systems. I'm a systems-oriented kind of person. Yeah. Or I couldn't follow this conversation. But as a systems-oriented person, I the greatest challenge to me, the greatest challenge to my classical liberalism, my individualism as a good unto itself, freedom as good and unto itself for its own sake, is the fact that our society in America, our kids in this country in the past 10 years have turned towards dramatic, systemic, epidemic levels of sadness and tragedy.
Particularly young white women.
Yes,
that's
but broadly.
Yeah.
That what we have is something that if you are simply a materialist who believes in institutions giving rise to things that are something like the golden rule, and therefore we end up all better off and we keep getting richer and graph goes up and to the right. Okay, but science and materialism is about looking at reality and understanding cause and effect on the basis of reality. And so the question we are circling around is human nature and what is the good. And we have a problem. And that problem is that the wealthiest society in the world happens to have become, and I would say America, but the West has gotten sick. In some respects, I can empathize with the Islamic cleric.
I totally understand.
Who looks at us and says, look at you people. Look at what you're doing to your children. I
completely understand.
Even with all the problems they have with that. You are the great Satan. And it's like, you have a little bit of a point. And so why? Why am I even in a position to judge that as wrong? Is this just the social evolution? Maybe anxiety's good, or maybe it's our nature.
Okay, and anything,
I have a framework to see that as being bad.
No. But any answer to that question you give, other than reason, is that you're doing the same thing that the Islamic cleric is doing, and that's the difference. You're imposing an arbitrary God belief, a value, whereas my system, the one that I'm advocating, is univocal. Anybody from any circumstance can sit down and do these thought experiments. They can figure out fairness. They can figure out justice. But you're really operating in parallel. You have far better ideas that comport closer to the rational model. But you're basically doing is say, these are my God beliefs, and this is what we want. The whole idea of unleashed itself is part. You're kind of buying into this idea, but an idea that I happen to buy into too. But my vision for that, the way that I figure that out, is rationally drivable. You are the moment that you say, this belief is this way to treat other people is given to us by God. That's when the problem starts, and that's why I'm saying it's kind of terrifying to me that somebody wouldn't believe, or I'll actually say it, that you wouldn't believe, absent God, that there couldn't be kindness, or there couldn't be beauty, or there couldn't be human dignity. Like, that's terrifying to me. That means that those things keep you in the realm of the sane. Or if I've misconstrued your position, tell me.
And I know we might be at an impasse, but it's an interesting one. And I think that impasse is, I have not been convinced, and I'll leave it up to the audience and the viewer.
Yeah.
I don't think you have a coherent, defensible, rational explanation for human dignity that isn't fundamentally circular or utilitarian.
Okay.
I think all of them were, as you put them forward.
So so why don't we do this again? I need another, here's what I need. To really make that argument, I would need a few things. I would need remember, if it's true that, basically 55% of the people read at 6th grade level, that's horrifying. But I would need some time to really create the structure for which, I'm tapping on the right side of the table now, to which the moral argument for human decency can be made independent of its practical consequences. And I'm more than happy, because I was hoping that I could persuade you that I wouldn't have to construct a more complicated argument for the moral if you just accept the practical. But I can see the answer is no.
Yeah, I don't because
Okay.
yeah.
So then,
I like my like.
So
to,
well, let's have
yeah.
that conversation. I'll come back. I'm more and but next time 2 bottles of Chianti, and I'm more than happy to attempt to construct that argument. And if you think there's a flaw in my reasoning, or if you think it's wrong, or basically you just think it's not persuasive, I'm also happy to reconsider the arguments that I make to you, because I could certainly be wrong about any of this stuff.
I mean, I think fundamentally the best I've got is to say that as I've tried to better understand our history, because of the moment we're in, I think a lot of us are. I think this, like, the obsession with Rome and are we Rome is that. It's exactly that. It's things are going off the rails. Where do we look to find antecedent explanations for this kind of moment? Because, we're going to just spend ourselves into oblivion. I think other societies have done that, right? Like, why did they do that? Why are we doing it now? Why can't we act like adults and get our house in order? We have to have a crisis, or a war, or we haven't evolved. Like, I think those questions are all in the foreground right now in America in particular, but certainly broader, for a reason.
I agree.
And I think that if you're going to look at the human creature as a historical matter, then I think the argument for the potency of the Christian argument for dignity is pretty compelling. And I think which countries, which societies, which cultures were unleashed is a powerful argument. It's powerful. Now, obviously, there's supercharged societies in Asia that aren't Christian. So there's counter arguments on that front. It's not perfect. It's not ironclad. But I think that is potent. I think that the broader apologetics, I'm not going to put myself forward as Mr. Apologetics that can do all that. But I think I think that there's something more important, and I think it's why religiosity is resurgent. A complicated moral calculus that you need to work out as a homework assignment doesn't have the power to actually stick in our hearts and be mimetic.
I think that's true. Yeah, I think that's true. When I was thinking, if my goal were to win, which it was not, I would have talked about the excesses of Christianity. You touched on that a little bit. I would have talked about ripping out the tongues of atheists or what have you. But
those are easier to talk about.
Yeah, they're easier to talk about, and there's a kind of rhetorical devices or wins. But I do think that morality is complicated. It's like more complicated than Go, the game. It's hard, and it's hard because you have to. I mean, if it were easy, everybody would believe the same things morally, but people have radically different moral views. And so you have to really be thoughtful and take your time when you're talking about how, it's Socrates' question, how should you live your life? That's like the most important question you can ever ask yourself. And that's not something that can be done capriciously, or it's not something you do in 20 minutes. Like I've thought about this stuff for a long time. I've read about it, I've published about it. It's complicated, man. It's not tricky. And as much as you think about it, you still make mistakes and you still make screw ups. But I think ultimately 2 things are at play. One, there's a process. The moment that you agree that there are better ways to think about problems, that means there are worse ways to think about problems. And the moment that you agree there are better lives that people should lead, that means there are worse lives that people should lead. Then the question is, how do you figure that out? That's the first thing. The second thing is the kind of meta level of the conversation. I really like you. I really do. I think you're a good guy. Every time I've been with you, I've had a super good time. This is Jefferson's dictum, let friends be wrong. Like you can, and I think one of the things that you see now in the polarization of the country and people talking about the national divorce, which is a completely insane idea.
No,
I think
totally against that.
I think it's actually really good for people to have friends with whom they disagree. Like, how boring would it be if we just sat here and be like, that's right, I agree. This guy's great. Or, it would just be totally. Yeah. But I do think that that's particularly young people get in that trap. And I I think it's essential to say, like, you don't have to believe everything someone else believes. Like, I'm going to go to Hungary in a couple of days, and I'm going to have dinner my first night I'm back with Rod Dreher. Like, this guy's like an actual believing Christian, like you. He's like, he believes the whole thing, and we're good buddies. Like, I have a lot of like friends who are like hardcore. I would call him a hardcore Christian.
Oh yeah.
And I think it's really good for people's relationships to have friends with whom they disagree, and we've lost that. And it's okay if your friend disagrees with you. In fact, it's a good thing.
Peter Boghossian, I will give you the last word on that because we couldn't agree more. Thank you for being a good friend and for coming back to Dad Saves America.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks, guys, for filming. Thanks.